series of knocking sounds and raps. They would hear these knocking sounds and raps around the house, and eventually they tried to actually ask it questions about what it was. And they worked out a system for, you know, this many raps for yes, this many raps for no. Spirit rapping and table tapping and table tipping became a thing in the United States, and it spilled over to Great Britain, and from that point in time, and especially it really reached a peak during the Victorian era, communication with the other side electrified people's imaginations. Now it should be said that with the Fox sisters, one of the sisters, when she got older, recanted the entire thing. And she confessed, saying that what they were really doing was that their big toes, the joints of their big toes, would snap very loudly, and that one of them would use an apple tied to her toe to make some of the rapping noises. Now, believers are inclined to say that she made this sort of deathbed confession just to get people to leave them alone. And of course skeptics are like, well, that explains everything. So however you want to interpret that, one of the groups pretty much said, we made it up. We were doing this, we were faking it. Truth be told, nobody was ever able to verify that this peddler ever was there. Regardless of the veracity of the Hydesville, New York cases, tremendous numbers of people came forth and started to try to communicate to the other side. And they used a variety of methods. At this time, you would have a parlor. In a parlor, everybody, it was sort of your little talking space in your house. And people in the Victorian era, parlor games, this is where parlor games come from. You got together and you sat around and you played cards or anything. But cards, that was so passé for people who were bored in the industrial age. They wanted something extraordinary. So rather than playing cards, there were a number of games devised. The Ouija board was one of them, where you would sit two people at a little table, knees together, hands on the planchette, having the spirits ostensibly move from letter to letter, spelling out messages. It was sort of a step above just rapping. Table tipping, which was literally you put your hands on the table and the spirit would move the table and tip it back and forth between people. Victor Hugo was very big into using Ouija boards and has a tremendous number of conversations with various and sundry dead people that he and his group had kept track of. And I believe that there's a book out that documents that. W.B. Yeats did some work with automatic writing with his wife. There's a number of significant people that you learn about in history who had a passionate interest in this, who you might not necessarily learn about that interest because you learned about them as late, great, dead white people who wrote poetry or acted on the stage. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was a huge proponent of the spiritualist movement. Mediums were basically intermediaries between the spirit world and the physical world. Back then it was done a little bit differently. Most mediums had a spirit control. Basically we call it a spirit guide. They would contact a spirit that would supposedly reach out and find all of the other people who come through and talk through that person. Most mediums would enter a trance and have the spirit speak through them. At least one medium claimed to be able to have her spirit guide physically manifest. Now this is someone whose spirit guide very suspiciously looked an awful lot like her servant girl in pictures. So you have, at times, suddenly everybody dialoguing about how do you communicate with the dead, people devising ways to do it. They would have slates, musical instruments, tambourines, you'd turn the lights off, everybody would hold hands around the table. If the medium was sitting directly at the table, holding hands was to make sure that nobody was faking it, that nobody had a free hand to write on the slate or pick up the tambourine. They believed that these musical instruments picked up and sometimes would move around the room. Other mediums had a spirit cabinet that they would retire to, and from that cabinet then they would summon forth their spirit guide, and that person would ghost-like walk around the room, around the table, and touch people. In almost all cases, that was somebody's helper. And a fellow named Harry Houdini got involved with all of this because Harry Houdini was a mama's boy, a little Jewish mama's boy, and his mother passed away, and he desperately wanted to maintain contact with her after her death. When he'd gone to a number of mediums and didn't get the responses that he wanted, and felt that most of them were complete shysters who were using prestidigitation and sleight of hand and illusory tricks that he himself knew as a professional magician, he kind of went on a personal crusade to debunk as many of these people as he could. There are some who were less easy to debunk than others. Reading through the history, looking at it, you know, what it started for where we are today is the belief, as well as the attempt to prove or to debunk, really started psychical research. The American Society for Psychical Research, the SPR, the Society for Psychical Research in England, a lot of that grew up because people were trying to understand what was going on. Was it real? Was it fake? Did D.D. Holmes actually have the ability to levitate? What was this strange stuff, ectoplasm, that these mediums were supposedly using and generating from their body to create spirit manifestations? If you read about one of the mediums, she not only produced this stuff from her nose and her ears, but from other orifices as well. And the origin of some of this makes it somewhat suspect. Some people found that, you know, stuff that was claimed to be ectoplasm was actually like paper that was chewed up and other things that were regurgitated with healthy gobs of mucus and other things. And yet there was enough to inspire fairly intelligent, rational individuals to still pursue the ones that they couldn't disprove, the ones that they still had questions about, the ones that they couldn't quite explain. And that really in many ways leads us to where we're at, a rebirth of this entire exploration. We're under the same socioeconomic pressures in many ways. We are in a society that's lost a lot of its mysticism. It's been sort of turned stark and wonderless by a very materialist culture, and many of us are trying to figure out why. You know, what is there on the other side? We are, much like the Victorians, questioning the doctrines of dogmatic religion and going, okay, I want to believe, but what should I believe? And so the inquiry into whether or not there is life after death is usually the first and foremost question. Will I still be here when I'm dead? Is Uncle Bob still here? Are they happy? Is there a heaven? Is there a hell? What does it all mean? And that's really what a seance, at the core of it, is more about trying to figure out, trying to answer those questions. Through whatever means can be devised from any type of, at this point from Ellison onward, people started to go, well, there's technology. Maybe the ghosts can speak to through the technology. Fortunately, we don't believe so much in ectoplasm. We don't need to have spirit manifestation through some sort of quasi-physical substance, because otherwise, well, I guess I have allergies a lot, so I'd be really good at generating ectoplasm in that case. So what I suppose we're going to recreate here is just literally the table sitting style of the seance. Are we going to have more people here?
Yes, we will.
Okay.
They will come in groups, and Margaret will
More
have
people
that.
where we will come together and join hands and see what we can reach out to, and if anything wants to reach back. And perhaps answer our questions, or perhaps convince us that it's all bunk. And
So those people, I'm sorry.
oh yeah, well, no,
let's
yeah, let's just
Those
go,
people
because
with
I can
A
just talk
on their
forever.
tickets have a seat at the table. The letter A.